freak! This weather sucks, man. It is getting cold here in Utah.
Yeah, it is.
Dude, don't you have like 1,000 homes? Isn't there someplace we can go inside?
I don't own any of them in Utah at all.
You don't own any in Utah?
Nope, it's not the best market for owning real estate. In fact, wherever you live, there's a high probability that you shouldn't own real estate where you live either. That is if you're interested in making as much money as possible. And today, we're gonna share with you where those markets are and how to make as much money in real estate as possible.
All right, Kris, at what point did you have the balls to go out of state to buy homes? Because that's a huge block for most people. It's scary.
So actually my first experience buying real estate out of state was a nightmare. I bought 187 homes on an REO tape from the government.
Tell me they were in Detroit.
Some of them were in Detroit. And I lost $1 million on that deal getting out of it, and it was a total nightmare. So,
but most people tuck tail and run then. Why did you keep doing it?
Well, here's the crazy part. I make more money buying out of state now than I could ever make buying in the state that I live in. So even though it was a bad experience for me and ended up turning into the #1 way to make as much money as possible, which is really what today's video is about, is educating you on how to go out of state, how to do it as easily and appropriate as possible, and where to do it where you can make as much money as possible. Let's go. All right, so check it out. In today's video, we're gonna be specifically talking about why to buy real estate out of state. Because let's face it, there's a ton of people that are like, that's terrifying, that's scary. You know, what if it doesn't go well? What if your house has a problem? You can't drive to it, you have to get on a plane. Like, it just sounds like such a big nightmare.
Well, and the truth is, Kris, there are some markets that suck. We live in Utah, and because during COVID, so many people were moving out of central areas into states like Utah, home prices here have skyrocketed. The median in Utah is like $600,000.
Yeah, so the national median is $420,000, and here in Utah, it's $150,000 plus higher than that, which means that Utah went from becoming 5-7 years ago one of the most affordable states to one of the most unaffordable areas in the country.
And I think of it like a bottle of water. If you go to the airport, a bottle of water is going to cost a lot of money, even if it's the same brand, the same water, if it's a Fiji bottle. Whereas if you go to the dollar store and buy it, it's going to be a lot cheaper. So location ends up being the most important part of this.
Now, the reason why we're having this conversation today is because I only buy real estate out of state, and I've got partners all over the world, people that met me through YouTube, who through social media, they're like, okay, Kris, I'm your partner, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, well, we wanna make the most money. Like, you wanna make as much money as possible, then we have to go to the deals where they're located, where we're gonna make the most money. So out of state is a very normal thing, but what was it like for you getting started and buying your first real estate out of state?
Dude, it was the easiest thing ever, but it's because you had built a system for this, Kris.
But wasn't it scary for you?
It actually wasn't. Most people it would be, but you gotta understand, Kris, I watched you. I've seen you do thousands of deals out of state. Nobody else had any issues. I saw how it worked. I saw people making money on their homes that were out of state. The property management is all taken care of, so it's like the fear is gone. It's like waiting for a roller coaster. You see other people go on the ride 10 times, you're like, okay, it's not that bad. I could do this. I could do this.
Well, today it's about you and why you should consider going out of state. Let's dive in. So what I want to do is give you a background on why look at doing real estate outside your backyard borders. Only 20% of Americans invest in real estate, and most stay local. They were taught this mom and pop shop methodology, which is like, oh, it's just like you do kind of a handful of deals and you own them and they're in your backyard. That's how I got started. Like, literally my first 80 homes were located here in Utah. Now I don't own anything in Utah except for the home that I lived in. Out-of-state properties can offer an 8 to 12% cash on cash return compared to 3 to 6% locally in high cost areas. So think of it like this. There's 324 markets that make up the United States. And doesn't it make sense that a handful of those markets would be the primed for the greatest growth, or they would have above average rents, or those economies would be stronger, or they would have housing demand crises where they would demand higher appreciation? Well, out of 324 markets, there's a handful of markets always that are going to give you double and sometimes even triple the returns of buying real estate anywhere else, especially your backyard.
So Kris, how do you know where you should buy? Because I mean, there's some areas in America where it's going to be obviously crazy expensive. New York City, Orange County, San Francisco, it's going to be crazy expensive, right? But then there's other areas like Texas, Alabama, or you bought in Detroit, dirt cheap properties, and it was also a bad move. So how do you know what makes a good market?
So before you can even ask the question, where should you go out of state, you actually have to have a different criteria. What are you actually looking for as a real estate investor? And since only 20% of Americans ever decide to own real estate by way of investment, you would assume that for those 20% at least, they're trying to do it to make money. I think that's a pretty fair assertion, right? Like, I want to become a real estate investor because I want to be wealthy, because I want to make money, because I want to be rich, which then means that you have to have criteria for doing your real estate. Now, before I look at any out-of-state markets, I do have a strategy for what makes the most money. And this comes out of my very first book on the best strategy in all of real estate. I'm looking for single-family homes that are at least 3-bedroom, 2 baths on up, but they have to be purchased below the median in hyper affordable areas. So let's take Utah, for example. You're saying that the median home price is over $600,000. But if I go out of state, I can target an area where my median is around $200,000, literally a third of the cost. Here's an example of buying in Utah and having a 4% cash on cash return versus going out of state and having a 10% cash on cash return. So all of a sudden it's like, wow, out of state can make real estate more affordable and actually produce a higher cash flow.
Okay, so what other criteria do you look at?
Well, for example, is the state landlord friendly or not? For example, take a look at Texas. It's landlord friendly. I can get someone evicted from my property that stopped paying rent after just 3 to 6 weeks. But in California, that is not landlord friendly. They literally could stay in the house for 6 months. They're called professional renters. Literally, someone is going to rent your house, intentionally never going to pay you a dime because they know that they can actually live for free for 6 months. So when you go out of state, it becomes really exciting. You start realizing, wait a second, there's places to buy real estate that are a total nightmare, and there are also places to buy real estate where it's going to be way better than where I live. And outside of those 324 markets, we're looking for a handful of golden markets where you're going to perform better across the board. Out of state, I pick that market, I'm going to have better appreciation. I'm going to actually collect a higher rent. I'm going to have a better positive cash flow. You start adding up all the benefits, and all of a sudden, you're making way more money in real estate than you ever would in your backyard.
Okay, Kris, you talked about having this nightmare experience where you bought a bunch of homes and they ended up being bad assets, but you chose to stay in out of Utah markets.
Yeah.
So when did it turn around and start to look good?
Well, I actually had 2 things happening at the same time. I bought 187 homes from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These were homes that went back to the bank after the 2008 Great Recession crisis. And I bought these homes at more than a 90% discount. So as a real estate investor, I'm like, this has got to be a dream situation. What I didn't understand is that buying homes in Detroit, Cleveland, Ohio, and markets like that, where the majority of the homes were, was also a non-friendly landlord state.
Did you have some lifetime renters that were in some of those homes?
I had hobos that were living for free in some of my real estate. I had people, after I put 30 grand into a house to fix it up, I had people that were taking all the appliances out and even ripping up the floorboards and taking the copper out to resell the copper. And I started realizing, oh my gosh, I didn't understand the psychographics of the areas where I was going to own real estate, that buying really inexpensive real estate in those markets. And like I said, I lost $1 million getting out of the deal. But at the exact same time, I was also going into Phoenix and Vegas. I was buying homes there for $100,000 that had been selling for $300,000. These were newer homes, only 4 or 5 years old. And I rented those homes out very successfully. 5 years later, sold them. And I helped my investors clear over $100 million in gains. And so I had like the worst experience possible. I also had the best experience. And that's where I learned. The worst experience out of state was way worse than buying in my backyard. But the profits I made out of state in the other markets were way more profitable than I was ever going to make in my backyard. And so from that time forth, I never bought real estate in Utah. I only went out of state, but I learned how to identify the very best markets.
So Kris, what are the pros and cons? You painted both sides of the situation.
There's 4 major benefits to going out of state. The first one is you can access higher ROIs. It stands for a return on investment. And as a real estate investor, when you put money into a deal, you're doing that because you expect your money to perform for you. Well, by going out of state and selecting the best markets, you have access to the highest potential returns. Number 2, affordability. You can select markets that haven't boomed up to $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 for a median home price. I still buy homes sometimes under $200,000 in some of the best markets around the country. Number 3, diversification across markets. You can hedge against local economic downturns. And number 4, you can really maximize the tax benefits. Because when you buy real estate, our tax code supports real estate investors more than anyone else. Literally, you could make way more money, but also pay less and maybe even potentially no taxes at all.
So we've definitely talked about the pros, but Kris, we've got to acknowledge that there are some downsides to going outside your backyard. I mean, there's lack of knowledge if you don't know the area, management hurdles that you're worried something's going to happen in the home and you can't be there to rectify it if an appliance goes out, added costs if you're like always traveling there to inspect inspect things and work with your property management?
So in this game of real estate and winning out of state, it is way more important who you know than actually what you know. Because you don't want to go blindly out of state and hope that you're doing a good job. You actually want to align with people that this is what they do, this is where their expertise lies, this is what they're most successful at. I would never go out of state all on my own because it opens up not only those disadvantages, but a whole lot more. The last thing you want to do is own a property out of state that you did all on your own, and the only allegiance your property manager has to you, the 10% of gross rent that they're charging you, which makes you worth about $150 a month to them, which is not going to buy a whole lot of loyalty. That would be scary.
You know, Kris, I've looked through some of your past videos that have talked about buying out of state, and from the comments, I was able to glean some of the top concerns or fears that people have about buying out of state. And the biggest by far is fear of the unknown, not knowing how things are going to work out.
So the way you tackle fear of the unknown is not being the first to go in an area and then cross your fingers and hope that it works. You want to sync up with an organization or a group of people that this is what they do for a living. There's not a ton of them out there, but there are organizations that this is their expertise. What you're looking for is tapping into a group that has track record and deal flow so that you can evaluate their last 500 deals or 3,000 deals, and then from that feel like you're making a far more informed decision from a known instead of an unknown.
Okay, but can you really guarantee that something bad won't happen?
No, there's no guarantee that something bad won't happen when you're making an investment. The word investment implies that you're taking on a risk to produce a gain, which is why you want to double down on an organization that has the deepest track record possible, because other than that, nothing in life is guaranteed.
Okay, another huge thing for people these days online is the idea of being scammed, that I bought something that isn't even real.
That should terrify you. There's a lot of organizations and there are people out there that they're just trying to make a quick buck. There's an organization I won't mention by name that went out there doing lots of out-of-state properties for people that ended up being lemons. Like, I'm talking about awful homes, awful deals, and they got away with that scam for a number of years before they got caught. They had already made their money and then they ran out. So yeah, you again need to do your due diligence on the organization that you're going to be working with to make sure you're tapping into someone that has a lengthy track record.
Okay, and what do you do about this fear of poor cash flow, that the rents don't come in at what you're expecting them?
When you're doing enough volume like I am, you actually have a chance to negotiate higher cash flows, and that starts with lowering your property management fees. For example, most property managers charge you 10%. Some of my property managers charge as little as 6%. All of that money comes back in the form of higher cash flow for me. The other advantage that I have though is that when I go out of state, because I do so many deals, I now have actuaries. I have data that I can pull from that shows me that what I hoped my rents would be are actually what I'm going to get, and I can measure the difference. And on my last couple thousand homes, what we project as potential rents, we always get a little bit higher. Again, that just comes from experience.
Okay, and then another one of the top fears is this fear of remote management not doing a good job.
I actually think that's one of the most valid fears that you can bring up, because when you basically give your property to a property manager and say, care about this, you have to understand that you're giving them one home and they might be managing 1,000. So they're going to win on the collective. They're not going to win with you. You, in other words, you don't really matter to them. But how I overcome that is by finding a smaller property management company that's managing like 500 homes. And then over the course of a year or two, I'm going to give them 500 more homes. I'm going to double the size of their organization. And even though all of those homes come from all of my real estate partners, for example, they still treat me as one organization. And now all of a sudden they care about your house. Like literally, like when you look at your out-of-state doors, they don't care about you because you're Carson.
No.
They care about you because you're part of the whole and all that real estate that I bring them. So again, it's overcomable if you're part of a team. Here's the bottom line. If you buy in your backyard versus successfully going out of state, you can literally make twice as much money going out of state to the best markets as just buying real estate in your backyard. Sometimes it's even making 3, 4, or 5 times more money. And if you want to know how true that is, there's a link below where you can access my track record for free, and I'll literally show you my last several thousand deals, and I'll show you the ROIs that we're making, and you're going to see why people are making many, 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 many more times with their real estate portfolio than they are with their 401ks or IRAs for retirement. Because ultimately, real estate is an amazing alternative. You can access all that information for free. Click the link below, access my track record, see for yourself.
So the homes I've purchased are actually part of your track record.
Yeah, because I list all the addresses on thousands of the homes that we've actually done, and you've actually done some of them. Briefly, why don't you just share, Carson, what was it actually like for you to go out of state and leverage a team that had a track record, and what's happened to those doors?
So currently I have 2 properties in Florida with you, and they performed amazing. It was one of the easiest things that I've ever done.
So you bought 2 homes.
Yep.
You've owned them for the last 3.5 years.
Yep.
Let's talk about the first one. What did you buy it for?
About $215.
And then what is it worth today?
If I were to sell it today, it'd be $270 is what it would sell for.
Okay, so it's gone up substantially.
Yes.
And in addition to that, it started off by renting it, what, 3.5 years ago?
About $1,500.
And now?
$1,700. They actually just contacted me to say we're upping rent again to $1,700.
Okay, so basically rents have gone up, and then especially the value has gone up considerably, $55,000.
And here's the craziest thing, and the reason that I'm like so passionate about real estate, Kris, is that through all this time, the tenant is paying down the principal.
Yep.
You know, a portion of their payment every month goes to the principal. I own these homes. I don't have to do any work on it. It's all out of state, done by management, and I'm getting these gains along the way.
Be honest, in the last 3.5 years after buying the property, how many hours have you put into the deal?
Maybe total an hour.
Okay, so you've spent 20 minutes a year.
Property management sends me an email like every month. Here's an update on what's going on. And there's probably only twice, maybe 3 times in the past 3 years that I've had to jump in and actually do something.
All right, so what about the second home?
Honestly, Kris, they're both in Ocala. They're both so similar on paper that they performed about the exact same.
So overall net worth has increased over $100,000 just on buying these 2 homes, and you've got your positive cash flow on both of them. And it sounds like overall the experience of going out of state has been very, very positive.
It's been incredible. There are times where I forget that I even have these other homes. It's kind of like a 401k or something where it's just like put money into it and it keeps growing, but it's outpacing anything an IRA or a 401k can do.
And since I'm Carson's mentor, I'm going to tell him that in the next 2 years, he's probably going to be
we're
right.
getting ready to roll forward.
We're going to either refinance them and hold on to them, or we're going to sell them and take 2 properties. We're going to turn them into 4 properties. We're going to multiply your herd. We're going to multiply your portfolio.
Absolutely. And it's just been the easiest thing because, and this is a shameless plug for you, Kris, but working with you and your team, a lot of the downsides of buying out of state is overcome because you've already built a team to do these things. And I've just relied so heavily on that team, and it's been so smooth.
Listen, if you have a 401k or an IRA that is rotting away doing little to nothing for you, if you have equity trapped into a home, those are hidden assets that you can put into the right kind of out-of-state real estate and literally, potentially with time, roll it into millions of dollars. We just completed a report on my last decade of 2,130 rentals, and my average year-over-year ROI is 60.65%. Now, if you compare that to a 401k at 4.2% or an IRA at 5 or 6%, 60% isn't just a lot more, it's exponentially more, and it is what makes the difference that if you give real estate 20 years, if you take these 2 homes and you just let them roll and multiply for 20 years, you're gonna be sitting on a net worth potentially between 10 and 20 plus million dollars. By the way, if you wanna get in on some of that action, if you wanna learn how to access the best out-of-state deals, click the link below, grab my report for free. You're going to see a 20-year history of my company on thousands of homes, helping my investors make crazy returns. So if you want to retire sooner, if you want to become financially free, and if you want to be a successful real estate investor, click the link below, grab the information for free. Let me prove it to you.
Okay, Kris, you've made a strong case for buying out of state when doing real estate, but the burning question on everybody's mind is, what are the states you buy in?
Well, we've talked about Florida, but we haven't even talked about why, and there's 4 other juicy markets where we are making more money than any other market, hands down. And if you want to know all 5 of these markets and why we're there, click right here and watch this video.